someone is changing the way man flies. Bell Helicopter Textron, world innovators in tilt-rotor technology.
During their first trip to Vietnam, they were idealistic 19-year-olds. One was an old man of 25. Then they were flying $250,000 helicopters. Now they're going back simply as civilians.
I have nothing to compare it to. There were no people here before. These weren't people. They were local indigenous personnel and people on the ground and the enemy, and they could hardly tell the difference between them.
Let me take her back to her mom. That's your mom.
The last time I went to Vietnam, all I wanted to do was go there and come home. This time I want to go there and see the people, see the country, and find out what Vietnam really is.
While they're not back as saviors or soldiers, this time, before they leave, an American flag will fly over Vietnam once again.
In 1975, this country fell to the North Vietnamese, and for most Americans, that was the end. But for the people of this country, it was really the beginning. In the 14 years since that time, many things have changed, both here in Vietnam and for the Americans who served here. Join us for the next half hour as we follow 4 American veterans who have gone full circle and returned to Vietnam.
From Saigon, this is the American Forces Vietnam Network.
Full Circle, Return to Vietnam. Will continue in a moment.
So I think going back there and seeing the country now at peace is just a magnet. It draws me. It's something that I really can't explain.
They are only 4, just 4 of the estimated 3 million Americans who served in Vietnam. And like the majority of Vietnam vets, they are not the haunted heroes stereotyped in movies or television. They're about 40 years old now, with families, jobs, and lives far different than 20 years ago, when they grew up overnight in this faraway land.
We sort of came of age there. Those of us who served as helicopter pilots back then were all very young. That was sort of a rite of passage for us there. That's like going back to your hometown or going back to the old college campus.
As a pilot, you would go into a life-threatening situation and be out of it usually very quickly, a matter of minutes usually at the most, or in some cases just seconds.
Vietnam is the bond these men share, and it's brought them back. Mike McDonald is the only one still flying helicopters for a living. The former Huey pilot now flies Sky 12 for KPNX-TV in Phoenix. New Mexico realtor Bob Keesing was 21 when he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his heroism as a Cobra gunship pilot.
Could I have one, please?
Where are you from?
America. Where are you from? United States.
Jim Harris, a businessman and investor from North Carolina, was 25 years old when he was here last, older than the average American soldier. His wife, Georgia, has shared nearly every other part of his life, so she's here with him now.
We've been married quite a while. In fact, as I left for Vietnam, Georgia was pregnant, and she bore my first son when I had been here 6 months.
It was a year out of our marriage that I couldn't really relate to and didn't have any experience with, and so I had a lot of curiosity about that.
One other veteran decided to bring his wife along on this trip, but the circumstances for this couple are a little bit different. Dan and Effie Juneau are on their honeymoon.
Why not? It's a very exotic place. People are very nice, and we've been well treated. It's an unusual and exciting thing to do for a honeymoon, and that's what a honeymoon's all about, isn't it?
It's almost like going home to meet his parents, taking him to where I grew up. It's part of who he is, and being best friends, I want to know him in that way.
Dan and Effie organized the trip, putting together the maze of logistics for the group. And even after months of planning, no one was quite sure what they'd find once they arrived here.
Same American father?
Yeah.
And your sister?
Yeah, too.
Also?
Yeah.
But your father is dead.
Father?
Your father died?
Yeah, died here.
Died in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Experiences here years ago ripped Vietnamese and American families apart on both sides of the Pacific. Now veterans like Bob Keesing are trying, a family at a time, to bring lives back together, using the Ho Chi Minh City grapevine, which rivals any telephone system. Bob finds the family of Bon Trin. Bon escaped Vietnam as a youngster. He's now a college student in New Mexico, and he's not seen his mother and sisters for over 10 years.
But all these pictures are for you. And this is where you can write to them.
Since mail into Vietnam is censored, this is the closest to direct contact the young man has had with his family. While Bon's mother was happy to hear from her son, she showed little emotion. But then, like many Vietnamese, she's seen members of her family killed. She's struggling now to keep them fed, and maybe one day to rejoin Bon in the U.S. It seems in this life there's little room for emotion, only survival. Survival of a different sort plays with Bob's memories outside of the city.
It was never safe out here. Most of the people you came across in the field, you had to at least treat them as if they were Viet Cong, because you never knew which ones weren't. When I was here before, anybody in black pajamas was certainly suspect, and although it's their traditional native dress, being that close to them always put fear in our heart.
It's a common thought these veterans of the air hold as they see Vietnam 20 years later on what used to be the killing fields for so many of their friends.
I knew my job in the air. I knew nothing about survival on the ground. I could survive in the air. I would die on the ground. This time, being on the ground and meeting the people and seeing the cities as I never saw them, it's wonderful.
Finally, in times of peace, the Americans are seeing the country they had only known in war. They see Vietnam for the first time through the faces of her people. The many faces of Vietnam. For the first time since World War II, there is a generation of Vietnamese unfamiliar with war.
This is the longest period of peace they've had, other than the problems they're having in Cambodia. The countryside that we were driving through yesterday is at peace. and it shows in the faces of the people.
It's a country that has struggled against others and against itself for generations. War is a business they've come to know very well. And a successful weapon used by the Viet Cong were the tunnels of Cu Chi. Beginning just south of what was Saigon, the tunnels reached out like a giant spider web, interconnecting villages and towns 300 miles away. As the first American TV crew deep inside the tunnels, we saw an eerie, spooky world where the Viet Cong often lived for months, undetected by American troops. Georgia Harris and Effie Juneau were the first American women in the tunnels. It's an honor Georgia could have done without.
I wouldn't do it again either. When we got out on the surface, what you missed was that Effie and I hugged each other for surviving the ordeal. But when you think about the people that fought and lived and, you know, performed surgery and everything else in the tunnels, it's pretty incredible that they could do that.
14 years after the fall of Saigon, remnants of war remain. In fact, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam has built a war museum showing their versions of battles won and lost. Much of the country, though, has its own reminders.
Sure is. That's the tail section right here.
Like this fuselage of a jet aircraft, which now doubles as a home in a Vietnamese village.
Oh, look, they sure did. Look at this, Mike. Yeah. No question. That's amazing. That's been here probably since 1975.
I would imagine.
Then the veteran pilots came across a real find for them, an old Chinook helicopter.
This is a classroom.
It was a video arcade.
Video
arcade. See? And the TV set up there.
Holy cow.
Nowadays, there are also ways to get away from the reminders of war. And in stark contrast to the rice paddy, jungle, and crowded city pictures you've seen of Vietnam, is the cool mountain town of Dalat. If what you're about to see looks an awful lot like a French village, that's just what it used to be. Away from the constant noise in Ho Chi Minh City is the peace and tranquility the vets were looking for. Dalat is a place where they can be tourists like anyone else here. And in general, outside of the cities, little has changed for the Vietnamese. Water buffalo are still used on road crews, and ways of life follow the same rhythms as they have for decades. Children play on the beaches of Nha Trang as their parents and grandparents once did. Only now it's in the shadows of Russian ships docked in Cam Ranh Bay, with Soviet MiGs flying overhead. In the same town, you can hear the Bee Gees and Michael Jackson music blaring in the street. And the two worlds don't seem so far apart until you look a little closer.
The government and the bureaucratic system and the system in general is just utter nonsense.
The basic infrastructure is, I haven't seen a fire station since I got here. And what we'd do if we had a fire.
Many Americans who've recently visited Vietnam have concluded the people work, but the system doesn't.
For example, during our trip here, we had one plane reservation canceled, our hotel reservation changed, and most travel estimates were off by several hours.
Our scheduled across Vietnam airplane ride was replaced by this vehicle, The vets called it the bus from hell.
Am I pleased with having done this? Absolutely. Would I recommend it to someone else? Absolutely not.
But tourists' concerns pale in comparison to the lives some people here now lead, especially those Vietnamese who'd been allied with the U.S. before the fall of Saigon in 1975. Now they're at the bottom. Nat Phan John is known as Chico. He could have escaped Vietnam, but he chose to stay with his family.
Oh, when today American left, the people in this terrible. Nobody's go outside the street. You know, everybody afraid to the communists. But some, you know, they follow with the communists, they are happy.
Even Chico admits there have been recent examples of movement, some opening of the system.
Now the Vietnam learn from Russian, they have to change their minds and to open the country.
We are looking forward to the future, but we do not look back to the past.
Ever since about 1986, winds of change have been blowing through Vietnam. Though they're not formally recognized by the U.S. and most of its allies, there is subtle dialogue.
The most precious thing we desire is peace, independence, and development.
Bong says there are currently some 1,500 deals in progress between the Vietnamese government and foreign businesses.
And the first Ho Chi Minh City Holiday Inn will open in 1990. As strange as it may sound, Vietnam could be a player on the world scene sometime in the future. If you think that's impossible, just ask the Germans, the Japanese, and the Koreans.
We have committed mistakes, and we know that, and now we're trying to correct and to find a way out. We don't hide. We don't want to hide.
And some of the soldiers who've come back are very interested in reopening the door to Vietnam in peace.
You know, the children are the future of a nation, and I think our country has an opportunity now to repair some damage that we may have done. And I think this is a small window of opportunity for us to sit down at the table, settle our differences, and get on with the world.
If Vietnam has one thing in abundance, it is children. The giggling, happy faces of Vietnamese children are everywhere. If our hearts were wrenched by the tiny babies in a church orphanage, they were uplifted again as we met with children who loved Americans.
The thing that's really amazing is that the little children who were not here when we were here the last time have somehow developed a very positive attitude towards Americans. You like the pen? Not USSR, USA. USA, America.
Yes.
Not USSR.
Can you a souvenir?
Can I give you a souvenir, Dan? Do you have an extra flag? All right, I'll. May I put this? May I put it on you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Thank you.
It's not on the surface. It's underlying, and it's got to do with the flag. And when we walk around the city or when we are in the elevator, we point to the flag and number one.
And in their schools, the most popular class, English.
And that's why the industrial centers in the 19th century, during the...
And in talking to the English professor at the university, this fellow's the dean of the English department, and he works for less than $10 a month. And when I asked him if there was anything that we could do for him, he said, please send books.
In a poverty-stricken country like this, where the inflation rate last year alone was 400%, you wonder how they can even smile. But as the vets learned, the smiles for them never stopped.
And even though we may have lost the war or withdrawn from the war, depending on your point of view, I don't think we should lose these people. They still love us. They're still waiting for us to come back.
Thank you for coming to talk with me. I hope we see you again the next time.
Full Circle, Return to Vietnam, will continue in a moment.
Going to Vietnam these days, you might want to see the spots that America marked as its own during the war.
Somewhere along here where it turned back into jungle, there was a train that was on its side that had been there for many, many years.
But reminders of America have been very conspicuously wiped away by the Vietnamese government. Tours are specifically discouraged from visiting some of those spots.
That's it right there, I guess. Yeah. The tracks are all gone. Most of the tracks were there.
To see the contrast most clearly, 20 years ago, this was Long Binh, the heart of Army operations for the war. 25 square miles with 4 million gallons of fuel and all the planning activity for Vietnam. It was located just north of Saigon. This is what it looks like today. An empty field.
We left behind so much that I would have expected them to use again. And it seems as though they haven't done any of that. They've just erased everything except for those few installations that the Soviets are using now.
Within Saigon, there are some recognizable spots, most notably the former U.S. Embassy. It's now the headquarters for the electronic and gas utility, with a prominent Vietnamese flag always in sight. But Saigon was not home for these four. They spent little time here. This is where desk jockeys pushed paper as far as many of them were concerned.
I wanted to go to those places that meant a lot to me and to see those things that I saw a lot of. We were unable to do that.
Along with the disappointments, though, there were some surprises.
When I was here before, I didn't have nearly as much contact with the Vietnamese as I'm having on this trip. I've seen more of Vietnam up close in the last 5 or 6 days than I saw in a year while I was here.
People have responded even better than I expected. I think they're genuinely happy to see us. The idea of carrying around small American flags was a terrific idea. I don't know who came up with that originally, but it's made the difference.
And for Mike McDonald, there was a discovery.
Well, I came back and found something that I lost in Vietnam, and that was innocence. And I found that innocence with those kids on the beach in the Trang.
A spontaneous moment that, for him, is just as memorable as any of the hundreds of missions he flew the first time he was here.
After they found out we were Americans, it was great fun. We swam, ran on the beach.
And the vets were back on the beach to wrap up their 8-day return to Vietnam. To bring this trip to an end, Mike McDonald had put down a few thoughts on paper. It was a plan he'd come up with even before he left his home in Phoenix.
These are the boots that I wore in basic training, flight school, Vietnam, and as an instructor pilot. As we lost crews in Vietnam, people we'd never see again, part of our remembrance of them was a memorial ceremony using the boots and a helmet. The boots are signify the person. They take the place of the person in that memorial. And to me, these boots signify my life as I've traveled this country and the United States, and now back to this country.
But besides bringing the boots and wearing them here in Vietnam again, Mike McDonald wanted to use them as a symbol of the return to this country for all four of the pilots.
We've returned to the killing ground of innocence and childhood to seek out those places that long ago meant so much.
So on the final day of the trip, on the beach along the South China Sea, the pilots gathered to remember.
We soldiers have returned to this strange land, the defenders of a vanished nation, to meet the victors of a failed dream. These boots we have placed on this beach should remind us of those lost friends. These boots walked this land in war 20 years ago and have returned to walk this land in peace. I have sought answers to many unanswerable questions while wearing these boots, flown many flights in peace and in war. I will now leave these boots in this country where I became a man These boots and I have come full circle and found the truth. There are no winners in war.
And for perhaps the first time since 1975, an American flag was flown over Vietnam, if only for a moment.